Final analytics presentation, I wanted to explore who is more valuable to their team, Mike Trout or Barry Bonds. So to start off, I want to give a couple of player backgrounds. Mike Trout, he's a generational player. He currently plays on the Angels. He's been playing for 10 years. Three-time MVP, eight-time All-Star, Rookie of the Year, two-time All-Star Game MVP. And Barry Bonds played for the Giants and the Pirates. 22 seasons, seven-time MVP, 14-time All-Star, eight-time Gold Glove winner, and two-time batting champ. Also noteworthy, Barry Bonds is a Sun Devil. So looking at their general hitting comparison, I wanted to break down their career numbers compared to one another. So since Bonds has played 22 seasons, whereas Trout has only played 10, much of these statistics are on a per year basis, just so we don't get inflated numbers that are difficult to interpret. So to start off, wins above replacement is probably the most prolific stat in baseball that you're able to value players at. And Trout has a higher tick than Bonds by 0.04. So this shows that they're pretty on par with one another. Trout has a slight advantage over Bonds. Bats and hits per year, as well as batting average per year. Trout has Bonds' number in these categories, but every other offensive category Bonds has. He's got more home runs per year, more runs per year, more RBIs per year, higher base percentage, higher slugging percentage, higher on base plus slugging, and higher OPS plus, which is on base plus slugging adjusted for the ballpark. And that number is set at a baseline of 100. So because these players are in the 170s to 180s, that means they're just astronomically better than the average MLB player. An interesting thing to note is Trout averages 4 home runs less a year than Bonds. This is also because Bonds had a little bit of not a great home run hitting season, like first couple seasons in his career, and his last season was a little bit of a downturn. But Bonds also has the home run record. So if Trout is able to keep up or even match his pace, that home run record could possibly be scared in the future. Going a little bit deeper on wins above replacement, I wanted to compare the first 10 years of each player's career, just to kind of get an idea of how each player is progressing. So Trout's first and last years were a little bit uninterpretable because his last year was a COVID shortened season. So he didn't have as many games played. And his first year, he was also a rookie who was in the minor leagues the majority of the year. Therefore, he only played less than 30 games. But Bonds is pretty good increase on WAR as he goes along the season. But the second half of his career is where his WAR really took off, where he had multiple seasons over 10. And to contextualize WAR, anything over 8 is an MVP quality season. And these players are consistently over 8. So that just goes to show that these are perennial MVP candidates in their career. So what happens to these teams if their players don't exist? So if Mike Trout and Barry Bonds disappear from the team, what would happen? So I wanted to look at would these teams make the playoffs if you took the number of wins they had in the season and you subtracted out the player's individual WAR contribution to that team. So in 2014, the Angels made the only playoff appearance during Trout's career. They won the AL West, and they still would have won the AL West without Trout's WAR that season. And they still would have gotten swept in the ALDS by the Royals, who went on to the World Series and lost to the Giants. And then in 1990 through 92, Bonds' only playoff appearances with the Pirates. This was in a time when there's only 2 teams that made the playoffs, the division winners of each division in the National League and American League. So without Bonds, the first year, the Pirates would not have made the playoffs, whereas the other 2 years, they still would have won their division and made the playoffs. MLB expanded their postseason to include more teams, and this went into effect while he was with the Giants. In Bonds, if the 97 Giants did not have Bonds, they would not have made the playoffs, whereas the 2000 Giants and the 2003 Giants would have. The 2002 Giants are interesting to note because they got in as a wild card team. So without Bonds' WAR that year, they wouldn't have made the playoffs. And the Giants ended up making it all the way to the World Series, where they lost to the Angels. So that's a little interesting tidbit. So we wanted to kind of understand how Bonds' data could be attributed to the second half of Trout's career and kind of use some guiding principles for how Trout can effectively make his team better by increasing his WAR as much as he could. So we ran correlations to find which hitting statistics individually most strongly contributed to WAR. So looking at these players' data from the first 10 seasons for Trout and using it to compare to Bonds' entire career, we found that in Trout's data, hits, batting average, and home runs had the highest correlation to WAR, with a 939 for hits, 847 for batting average, and 781 for home runs. This is a pretty good, strong positive correlation between these numbers and WAR, meaning an increase in these numbers would lead to an increase in WAR. Bonds' data also affirms this. We see that hits has an 829 correlation with WAR, and home runs have a 770 correlation. So that just means to show that both of these data sets are on par with one another, that the more hits they get and the more home runs they get, the higher the WAR would be. So kind of applying this to what Trout should do in the future, Trout should focus on improving his BABIP, which is his batting average on balls in play, and his home runs to positively impact his WAR. So he should aim for a lot of hits and a high tally of home runs, which is kind of where you see the game going to these days, which is a home run or bust type mentality. Trout should try to combine a high contact rate with a high exit velocity, where he will lead to a lot of home runs and a lot of hard hit balls in play. And with the higher WAR, you get a better performance by the player, and hopefully that increases the overall team success. A little bit of note here, the regression for an individual player is not a very good predictor of the overall team wins. When we ran the regression on these numbers, it came back that R squared was 14%. So the variability in wins by an individual team was explained, was 14% by the player's data. So that doesn't really show you a good estimate of how many wins a team would get. So to do that, we'd have to use the overall team statistics. So we wanted to compare each player's best season. And in this case, it was 2001 Barry Bonds versus 2012 Mike Trout. We selected the highest WAR accumulating season. And it just goes to show that Trout's best season was not even on par with Barry Bonds. Yeah, he had more hits, but he also had more plate appearances, so his batting average was a little bit less. Bonds led him in every other statistical category: home runs, RBIs, batting, or walks. He had less strikeouts. He had a higher batting average, higher on-base percentage, higher slugging percentage. OPS and OPS plus were also higher. His OPS plus numbers are absolutely astronomical. He has 259 OPS plus, which is absolutely unheard of. And also, interesting note is 177 walks. We'll get to that in a little bit, but Bonds got on base a lot. I also wanted to make sure that because their playing careers didn't overlap, they did not face different talent. So just to make sure that that Trout isn't facing better pitchers or Bonds wasn't facing better pitchers in their career, I wanted to look at the overall pitching data for their careers. So I accumulated all 10 years of Trout's career in pitching data and 22 years of Bonds' data in pitching data, just to see if there's any statistical anomalies, and there isn't. The pitching is generally pretty similar throughout their careers, so that you can't assume that there's a worse pitching in Bonds' career than there is in Trout's. And then we wanted to determine the value of each player. based on their salary. So Bonds and Trout have a pretty similar career earnings up to this point in Trout's career. He just signed a massive contract, which we'll get to in a minute. But if we looked at the career WAR, Bonds has 162.8 and Trout has 74.4. Again, this is only through Trout's 10th season. But we wanted to look at the amount of money a team spent per one win above replacement for these players. And Bonds' teams only spent $1,156,000 per one win above replacement, whereas Trout, up to this point, his teams have spent $2,054,000. Trout's next contract is currently under his new contract, which was a 12-year, $430 million contract. He has 10 years and $37 million per year left on that contract. So if he wanted to produce at Barry Bonds' rate of $1,156,000 per one win above replacement, he would have to average 32 wins above replacement every year for the next 10 years, which is impossible. The highest WAR ever was a 20-something in the 1800s, when WAR was a little bit inflated because of the style of baseball back then. So Barry Bonds is the most valuable player, essentially, because of his cheap cost in a very high production environment. So overall, we determined Barry Bonds is more valuable than Mike Trout. Don't get me wrong, both players are generational talents. Both deserve to be in the Hall of Fame for the amount of positive contribution to offensive statistics they have. Barry Bonds has the MLB record in home runs, walks, and intentional walks. And it's also important to note Barry Bonds was walked with the bases loaded. And this never happens in baseball. So Trout has a long way to go if he wants to catch Bonds in the home run category, but I don't see that number being broken for many years to come. And there are my sources, and that might be why Bonds is not in the Hall of Fame. Thank you for watching.